Beloved Delaware farm owner, 65, dies after being crushed by his own camel in tragic farm accident. A quiet farming community in Delaware is mourning the heartbreaking loss of a beloved farm owner and animal lover after a tragic accident involving one of the very animals he had raised with care for years. Now let's uncover every twist, emotion, and hidden truth behind this story on our AI podcast.
Welcome to the deep dive. So to start us off today, I want you to just picture a scene. Imagine a 65-year-old man walking across his 50-acre farm in Delaware.
Right. Sounds pretty idyllic.
Yeah, exactly. He's just heading out to check on his beloved family pet. The whole environment is completely peaceful. It's totally routine. I mean, he's done this thousands of times before.
Right.
But the pet he is going out to see is a full-grown camel named Batman.
Yeah, which is definitely the part of the story where things take a very unexpected turn.
It really is. It sounds like the setup to, a quirky, uplifting story about an animal lover. But today, we're looking at an article titled Tragedy at the Caride Farm. And it details how this completely routine, loving interaction ended in a sudden, just unimaginable tragedy.
It's a profoundly heavy story. The events in Felton, Delaware, they offer this really stark look at the absolute boundary between the emotional reality that humans construct and, well, the unyielding physical reality of the natural world.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly that boundary. We are exploring that delicate and honestly, sometimes really perilous line between immense human compassion and the sheer unpredictable mechanics of massive animals.
Which is a tension that anyone who works with large animals has to navigate.
Exactly. So to really understand the weight of what happened, we first have to establish the environment this man, Juan Caride, created. He and his wife, Tony, they owned this 50-acre farm.
And the sources make it immediately clear this was not some casual weekend hobby.
Oh, no. Not at all. It wasn't a petting zoo. This was their entire way of life.
Right, because maintaining 50 acres of an active animal sanctuary requires just a staggering logistical and physical commitment.
Yeah, I mean, what was the exact count? They had a lot of animals.
Yeah, so we are talking about an environment housing 20 horses, 9 donkeys, and 3 camels.
Wow.
Just the raw mathematics of that ecosystem is daunting. Think about the daily caloric intake required for 32 large herbivores.
I can't even imagine the feed bills.
Exactly. Tons of hay, the specialized veterinary care, plus, the constant mucking of stalls, repairing fencing, monitoring the water troughs, whether it's freezing winter or blistering summer.
Yeah, it's an industrialized level of labor.
It really is, but it was completely driven by their personal dedication.
And I think that level of daily physical sacrifice, it tells you so much about the man at the center of this story. Because Juan wasn't just managing this enormous farm. He was also a well-known local pawn shop owner in the community.
Which is a very specific type of business to run.
Right. Running a pawn shop, it puts you right on the front lines of people's daily struggles. You are dealing with individuals who might be going through a sudden financial crisis.
People who need immediate help to pay a bill or fix a car.
Exactly. And the local accounts from the article describe Juan as incredibly hardworking and just deeply generous. He was someone who really acted as a sort of informal safety net for his neighbors.
Taking those two roles together, it paints a very vivid psychological profile.
Yeah. How so?
Well, whether he was standing behind the counter of his shop or walking the fence line of his farm, Juan's default mode of interacting with the world was caretaking.
Ah, I see what you mean.
Right. He was a provider. He identified problems, whether that was a neighbor's financial shortfall or an animal in need, and he just stepped in to fix them.
And that provider mindset completely shaped the culture of the farm. Like if you think about a standard commercial livestock operation, animals are often treated as, units of production, right?
Yeah, there are protocols.
Right, protocols, distinct physical barriers, and just a necessary emotional detachment. But the farm that Carides built was the exact opposite.
It wasn't a business, it was a home.
Exactly. I'd compare it to a meticulously curated, multi-species family. The boundary between livestock and beloved household pet completely dissolved for them.
And dissolving that boundary changes the entire dynamic of animal husbandry.
How does that shift things in practical terms?
Well, in commercial agriculture, recognizing the animal as a potential physical hazard is basically step 1 of workplace safety. You never forget the sheer mass of a steer or a draft horse.
You're always on guard.
Right. But on a sanctuary farm that is heavily driven by empathy, that emotional distance shrinks to 0. The caretakers view the animals through a lens of affection and a familial bond.
And that obviously heavily influences how they physically interact with them on a daily basis.
Exactly. You drop your guard because you love them.
And nowhere is that erasure of emotional distance more apparent than in the story of Batman the Camel. Because, Batman didn't arrive at this Delaware farm as this towering, imposing adult animal.
Right. He was basically a newborn.
Yeah, Tony Caride noted in interviews that Batman arrived when he was just about 1 week old. I mean, we are talking about an infant.
And an animal that young is completely dependent on its caretakers.
Totally.
A 1-week-old camel requires bottle feeding, constant supervision, physical comfort. They are functionally helpless.
And this is where Juan's profound empathy really takes the wheel. He is looking at this baby camel, and he doesn't just see a young herbivore. He looks at Batman and becomes deeply worried that the animal is lonely.
Which is a fascinating cognitive leap if you think about it.
Oh, for sure. Because he's attributing a human emotion to him.
Right. Acknowledging loneliness in an animal requires projecting a complex human emotional state onto a completely different species.
Yeah.
It shows how deeply Juan was observing this creature, not as a biological specimen, but as a feeling being capable of experiencing social isolation.
And because he perceived that loneliness, Juan took immediate action. He didn't just feel bad for him. He went out and actively searched for companions.
He essentially built a family for him.
Yeah, he specifically tracked down 2 female camels of the exact same age, who they named Bubbles and Chocolate, just so Batman could have a family unit to grow up with.
He engineered a herd to solve an emotional problem.
That's a great way to put it.
And by raising them together from infancy, constantly interacting with them, bottle feeding them, providing daily affection, the Curids habituated these camels entirely to human presence.
Tony actually gave an interview years before the tragedy where she described the camels with incredible warmth. She talked about them having, quote, really nice personalities.
It's so sweet how she talked about them.
It really is. She called them lovable, affectionate, and curious. She pointed out how much they genuinely enjoyed interacting with people.
But those adjectives, affectionate, curious, lovable, those are the exact same words a person might use to describe a golden retriever.
Right, exactly.
It demonstrates a profound level of anthropomorphism, which is our tendency to attribute human traits, emotions, and intentions to non-human entities.
Yeah, and hearing Tony describe these camels like giant golden retrievers, it really makes me wonder about the psychological blind spots that creates.
It definitely creates them.
Like, does treating a massive 1,000-pound animal as an affectionate family member fundamentally compromise a caretaker's sense of physical security?
Yeah.
Does it give them a false sense of safety?
Oh, it absolutely alters the brain's threat assessment mechanisms. I mean, we really have to look at the neurology of habituation here.
Okay, lay it on me.
Well, when you first stand next to a massive animal, your amygdala, which is the part of the brain that processes fear and risk, is highly active.
Because it's huge.
Exactly. You are acutely aware of the hooves, the teeth, the sheer weight of the creature. Your brain is essentially screaming at you to be careful.
Because evolutionary history tells us that being near a 1-ton animal is inherently dangerous. If things go wrong, you lose.
Precisely. It is the opposite of a safe environment, biologically speaking.
Right.
But when you spend years bottle feeding that animal, nursing it through illnesses, and just, experiencing its gentle behavior daily, your brain undergoes a process of risk normalization.
The fear just fades away.
Right. The constant positive interactions downregulate that fear response. You stop seeing a 1-ton physical hazard, and you just start seeing Batman, the curious pet.
Wow.
The brain completely recategorizes the animal as a safe, intimate member of your social group.
It makes me think of building a beautiful house directly on top of a dormant fault line.
Oh, that's a really good way to visualize it.
Like, you pick out the curtains, you paint the walls, you host family dinners there for 20 years. You feel completely safe and comfortable in that house. But your feelings of safety, your beautiful decorations, none of that changes the geological reality of the tectonic plates beneath you.
No, it doesn't.
The house is still sitting on a fault line.
That analogy captures the dynamic perfectly. Because the emotional bond the Caride shared with these camels was completely genuine. The camels truly were gentle.
Tony wasn't making that up.
Right, she wasn't imagining that affection. But the human-animal emotional connection cannot overwrite biological and physical reality. Giving an animal a VIP pass into the family category, it does not change the animal's DNA. It doesn't change its skeletal structure or its mass.
So you can nurture the bond all you want, but at the end of the day, you are still standing next to a mountain of raw physical power.
And caretakers of large animals are always walking that tightrope. They must foster the trust required to handle the animal safely while simultaneously maintaining a really healthy respect for the physics of the situation.
Which is hard to do every single day.
It is. And when you blur those lines entirely, when the animal becomes a literal child in the mind of the caretaker, the awareness of that latent physical danger simply evaporates.
Which brings us to the day the fault line finally shifted. The day of the unimaginable accident.
Yeah.
So Juan is 65 years old. He is out in the enclosure tending to Batman. He's just performing a routine he has executed flawlessly for years. And then, according to the sources, the camel simply falls on him.
A sudden loss of footing.
Yeah.
Just a slip. But the impact of that fall causes fatal crush injuries to Juan. And despite immediate responses from emergency personnel, the injuries were just far too severe.
It happened so fast.
Yeah. There was absolutely nothing that could be done to save him.
It is a devastating, instantaneous pivot from the warmth of a daily routine to an irrecoverable catastrophe. And we really need to heavily emphasize the findings from the Delaware State Police here.
Oh, absolutely. Because when you hear a headline like "Man Killed by Pet Camel," the human imagination naturally tends to fill in the blanks with aggression.
We picture an angry animal, sudden attack, a beast turning on its master.
But the authorities investigated, and their conclusion was totally unequivocal. This was a tragic accident. There was zero indication of aggressive behavior.
Batman did not attack Juan.
Right. The camel didn't strike out, he didn't bite or charge. And while the exact biomechanical circumstances of the slip haven't been, publicly detailed, the fundamental fact established by law enforcement is that the animal simply lost its balance and fell, which is so heartbreaking. And let's actually break down the mechanics of what that means in reality.
All right.
If you are walking down a hallway with a friend, right, and they trip over a rug and crash into you, the stakes are incredibly low.
Right. You might bump into the wall, maybe get a bruise on your shoulder. You probably both fall down, apologize, and just laugh it off.
Exactly. And the kinetic energy transferred in that scenario is minimal because a human being weighs somewhere between 150 and 200 pounds, and our center of gravity is relatively low.
Right. But now scale that up. A full-grown dromedary camel can weigh upwards of 1,500 pounds.
It's a massive difference.
And they have these long, spindly legs that are adapted for navigating desert terrain.
Right.
Not necessarily the muddy or uneven ground of a Delaware farm.
Right.
Most of their mass is concentrated incredibly high up on their frame. So if an entity with that specific anatomy trips and falls on you, intent completely ceases to matter.
Intent is irrelevant at that point.
Exactly. It doesn't matter that Batman is lovable. It doesn't matter that he was hand-raised from a week old, or that he viewed Juan as a father figure. When an animal of that immense size and weight loses its footing, the laws of physics just take over completely.
Because gravity is entirely indifferent to the bond between a caretaker and an animal.
Wow. Yeah.
When 1,500 pounds of mass pivots and falls from a height of 6 or 7 feet, the kinetic energy involved is just catastrophic for the human skeletal and respiratory systems.
The human body simply cannot withstand that localized pressure.
No, it can't. It is a visceral, horrifying reminder of how quickly the emotional reality we project onto these animals can be violently displaced by the cold, undeniable mechanics of the physical world.
You have this gentle, curious personality trapped inside a body that, just by its mere existence, carries lethal potential. And the ripple effects of that split-second physical event, it completely shattered the surrounding community. The sources spend quite a bit of time detailing the aftermath, and you can really see a town struggling to process the sudden loss of someone they deeply relied on.
Because Juan's dual roles in the community meant his loss was felt on multiple fronts.
Right.
The people who relied on him at the pawn shop, the neighbors who knew his generosity from the farm, all of them were suddenly confronted with this massive void.
The sources mention a specific friend, a man named Torres Hector, who Juan actually considered a brother. And Hector shared one of their final conversations.
Oh, that part was so moving.
It really was. It's incredibly brief, but it carries so much weight. Juan simply told him, "I love you." And Hector replied, "I love you too, Pappy."
Final conversations like that, they become emotional anchors for the people left behind.
They really do. And during his interview, Hector was actively fighting back tears. He remembered Juan and Tony as, quote, real, beautiful people.
He wasn't just talking about their farm or their business.
No, he was talking about the core of who they were. They were the kind of people whose default setting of kindness had touched countless lives in that town.
Reading through those community accounts, the overwhelming theme isn't just shock at the manner of his death. It's really a deep appreciation for the manner of his life.
Definitely. But, the tragic irony of the entire situation is difficult to shake. Because Juan lost his life in the very act of doing what defined his existence.
Right.
He was actively caring for a vulnerable creature he had raised from infancy. His death was a direct result of his caretaking. If he hadn't worried about a baby camel being lonely.
If he hadn't gone out and bought companions.
Exactly. If he hadn't dedicated 50 acres and countless hours to these animals, he would never have been standing in that specific spot. He would still be alive.
It's true.
But if he hadn't done those things, he wouldn't have been Juan Caride.
No, he wouldn't. He died inside the very ecosystem of empathy that he purposely engineered. And we have to remember, he wasn't engaging in a reckless stunt. He wasn't taking some unnecessary gamble for an adrenaline rush. He was merely maintaining the world he built.
Just doing his daily chores.
Exactly. And the community's reaction really reflects an understanding of that. They are choosing to remember the compassion that drove him rather than the mechanical physics of the accident that took him.
Because his legacy isn't the accident. His legacy is the pawn shop, the friendships, the 50 acres of sanctuary.
That's what remains.
But sitting with the reality of how his passing happened, it still leaves you with a deeply uncomfortable tension. It challenges everything we like to believe about human-animal relationships.
It demands that we evaluate the hidden terms and conditions we accept when we bring the natural world into our daily lives.
It really forces you, the listener, to confront the concept of risk normalization. Because we all willingly accept certain risks in the name of love, passion, and caretaking.
We do.
Juan accepted the physical risk of living alongside massive animals every single day. By the end, he likely didn't even perceive it as a risk anymore, because that camel was family.
And we do the same thing in our own lives, albeit usually with much lower stakes. We normalize the dangers associated with our passions because the emotional payoff is so incredibly high.
Right. So I want to leave you with a final concept to mull over today, something that really crystallizes the tension in this story. Think about the entire concept of wildness versus domestication.
Okay, that's an interesting lens.
Right, because we are taught to view domestication as a destination. We believe that once an animal is domesticated, it enters a permanent state of safety.
We treat domestication as a guarantee of predictability, a contract that says if we provide the food and the shelter, the animal completely abandons its capacity to harm us.
But look at the evidence here. If an animal raised by humans since it was 1 week old, surrounded entirely by love, companionship, expert care, and entirely habituated to human contact, if that animal can still inadvertently cause such absolute devastation simply by tripping over its own feet,
Right.
does true domestication of massive creatures ever really exist?
Or is domestication merely an emotional illusion we project over an animal to make ourselves feel secure in its presence?
Are we ever truly taming them? Or do we just learn to comfortably and sometimes perilously live in the shadow of their untamed physical mass?
It's a heavy question.
It is. We desperately want the predictable, heartwarming script where love conquers all. But nature doesn't read the script. Sometimes the sheer unimaginable gravity of the physical world asserts itself, and all the empathy, affection, and care in the world cannot stop a 1,500-pound animal from falling.
It is a profound reminder that we are only ever visitors in the physical reality of the natural world, no matter how lovingly we try to furnish it.
That is our deep dive for today. Keep wondering, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, one question for you. Do you think this heartbreaking accident shows that even animals raised with love and care from a young age can still become dangerous because of the size and natural instincts? Why or why not? Thanks.